Hi there, Dave Levine here. Thanks for joining me today for episode number 19 of the Sports Stories podcast. This episode is number 4 of a series of 5 with the straight-talking, insightful and at times controversial cricketer, Mr. Paul Smith. From previous episodes with Paul, you will be aware of the great people he has worked with and been coached by, and also he has had many highs and lows within his career. Today's episode, I'm delighted to touch on a really important issue surrounding mental health and well-being. It is such an important aspect of our lives, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Paul's perspective. So let's crack on with the podcast, and let me introduce once again today's special guest, former cricketer and now author, Mr. Paul Smith. So Paul, we're sat here at Edgbaston Cricket Club. I would like us to address a really important and current topic of mental health in sport, and also leading on to where does that take us in terms of cricketers and performers' life after sport. You know, how does their mental health be affected? What's next for them? And a minute ago we were also talking a little bit around suicide and, you know, cricket having a very high suicide rate. What's your thoughts?
Well, if you play professional sport, you'll retire twice in your adult life. I played for 16 years, and by 32 I'd had enough. Right. And from there you work out what you're going to try and do with the rest of your life. Right. People lose their careers through injury. People lose a career they thought they were going to have, and sort of they start off the first couple of years do well, and within 3 years later they're released and they can't get another club. Right. Some people can have very successful careers, and then when the career is over, anything else that they're involved in seems semi-pointless. Right. Now, whether that is an ego thing, whether that's just something that doesn't light their fire as much as the thing they once did, I don't know. But what I do know is that professional cricket has the highest success and the highest suicide rate of any of the sports. Right.
Why would you say that is?
I think that this generation of players get a huge amount of advice about what they might do when their career's finished, and they get that as an ongoing process through their playing career. We didn't get that, so when we finished playing, quite literally that was that. There may be a few people that, people would always say, always keep a business card of every person you ever meet. Well, if that was the case, it would be as high as a block of flats. Right. I don't mean to say it's going to help. Yeah. I think the key is you have to work out what do you want to do with the rest of your life. And you say, do you want to work indoors? You want to work outdoors? Right. You want to work in IT? You want to drive a van? You want to be a man in a suit who sells Mars bars for Mars? You want to go up and down motorways trying to flog things for a company you don't believe in? What do you want to do? Do you want to stay in sport? Do you want to coach at your local club and try and find a job somehow? What do you want to do? And most people, if they're honest, would say they don't know what they want to do. So I think that the suicide figures probably stem from generation, obviously before this one. I can't remember the last cricketing suicide, but it wouldn't have been that long back in real terms. Yeah. How do you fill the void? Yeah. As I say, sometimes it gets a little bit frustrating when people refer to you as the cricketer when you're no longer a cricketer. You haven't been a cricketer for over 20 odd years, and yet that's how people tag you. Right. They never, I could say, well, I'm an author, I've written since I was 24, I speak at functions, I do this, I do that, I've worked in community.
So they gave you the identity of a cricketer.
So the cricketer is the identity. Yeah. And the key to it is it's very difficult to stay within the sport because there's only so many jobs. Yeah. And many of the people who work within cricket are desperate to stay within cricket. So they wouldn't really want you challenging their position. PCA, Professional Cricket Association, are much better now at working with players post and present, as to have a future with more harmony, if you like. Yeah. Things like the support mechanisms. I know they run courses where people come in and give talks, and they try and funnel people in different directions. I think there's an option there if you go to them if you say, I want to be a stonemason on the deep end of far end of Scotland, I'm sure the PCA would help you, they would.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the key is you have to know what you want to do, or you certainly have to know what you don't want to do.
Okay. So knowing what you don't would be helpful.
Well, I think for someone like me, that is pivotal, because don't try and train me in a field that I don't want to be in, because I might turn up on Monday, but I'm not sure I'll be there Tuesday afternoon, and I've wasted your time, I've wasted your money, and my heart was never in the first place. So you're better off to say the harsh statement before you even set foot there. So, which then goes back to what you want to do when you finish playing cricket. Things like support mechanisms, excuse me, from a mental health point of view, are really, really good. Where if you contacted the PCA and said, I think I've got a problem, there is a referral system in place where if the issue is such, you can speak to people in Harley Street. You'll be referred to someone who works in the field who's linked to Harley Street, and people will try and talk players through whatever that issue might be. Some of it is heartbreaking, some of it is self-inflicted, some of it people have fallen into issues, problems, whatever it would be. The support mechanisms are there. So I think the PCA now...
Have you engaged with the PCA over time as a member of the sort of cricket community?
The PCA have helped me at different times. At the end of my career, whilst I was putting the building blocks in place, there were certain issues in my private life that I needed to address, and they were going to take up part of my time, where I needed, in order for me to work in the fields that I wanted to work in, I needed an element of stability. So what the PCA did with me is, if there was any creditors, if there were mortgage issues to be addressed, they would make sure that the difficult conversations where you might not have skills to pick up a phone to a mortgage company and say, listen, I know I'm in arrears for 3 months, but there are other people who would pick up a phone on your behalf, and they would have done it a million times for a million different people. You know, it could be anything.
So Paul, coming towards the end of your career, how did you work out where you wanted to go next and manage your kind of mental health around that difficult time?
Coming towards the end of my career, I knew I didn't want to be here. So once I knew I didn't want to be here, and I knew that I achieved everything that I'd actually set out to do, I was then twiddling my thumbs. The difference between me, my position then, is I actually had a good amount of cash, which meant that I could go to the States and spend time in Houston. I could go and do this. I could explore this. As I said earlier, you know, some people go and they talk about student debt. So if you got 50 grand's worth of debt after 3 years at university, I'd have taken 50 grand's worth of debt, because my debt, it cost me much more to get the education I had, but the education that I had has stood me instead and take me into lots of different fields from which I've learned and earned. And even if I couldn't earn from it by doing the manual work hands-on, I could write about it and earn, or speak about it and earn.
So your learning, I'm hearing, is it was exposing yourself to lots of different environments. And so if you want to know, if you think you can go and do good work in this field, in this area, in this part of the world, in order to weigh it all up, it's almost like a fact-finding mission, and you work out and say, well, how long is it gonna take? What's it gonna cost? And then work out whether it was feasible, and as long as it wasn't extortionate, I would just go and do it and go and hang out and see what it was and work out whether I could actually play a part in it. And then from there, it's a matter of, as you say, how could you fund it? This is where something like the ICC would be disappointing, because they only know what they know. Right.
If you go with different ideas, in effect, you need a sponsor, because the system won't support it. You need a sponsor, someone who sees what this is all about, and whatever they would get from that was their business, but what they needed to do was to put money in the pot.
Right.
But to go back to your point about things like mental health, the PCA would be would be very good at that, and someone like Marcus Trescothick would be one of the first guys that came out and spoke about issues that were affecting him, and effectively finished his international career, and he managed to get through it and play for another decade for his home team of Somerset. But there'll be other people who've lost members of family, without naming them, terrible situations that arose where there's no way you're going to get through that without someone getting you through it. But all sorts of things that the PCA are much better now than they were, but as I go back, and it's not a criticism of them, because I'd say to any organisation, there's a better system waiting to be put in place.
What advice would you give to individuals who are driving this journey and are conscious about their own mental health? And you've been through a really varied up and down career with loads of highs and lows, where your mental health and well-being has been challenged. So what advice would you give to somebody that's kind of in this place?
I would say, depending on what the circumstances were and who they were, I would always say, I speak to people who, I've spoken to loads of players over a 20-year period, where they wouldn't speak to the players' union because they feared that that it would then spread like wildfire, that they had issues which may affect their earning capacity, get another contract or whatever it would be. I think now in 2020, if I was a professional cricketer and I felt I had issues, I would speak to the PCA and ask to be referred to someone in Harley Street. And as simple as, you don't have to tell the PCA what it's actually about. You could just say, I think I need to speak to someone, can you refer me please? And if they say, can you tell us what it's about, just say, no, that's why I want to speak to someone about it.
And somebody outside of the cricket world, what would be the parallel to the PCA?
Samaritans. Samaritans, the Samaritans to a certain degree, the thing is, there's so many cuts where places that you could go for impartial advice, free advice or whatever, a lot of those things have closed down.
But what I guess what I'm hearing is you're suggesting that people go and look for impartial advice. Go and talk to somebody who's not going to judge them, who might help them with whatever's going on for them in their world, and there'll be different agencies that can provide this, whether in the sport world or without.
And if you talk about, if you are a sportsman or sportswoman, and it obviously doesn't affect just men, because there are examples, within women's sport where things have become too much for various reasons. You see, I wouldn't talk to people in sport about personal issues because they're involved in sport. If I wanted to speak to someone about a serious issue, I'd go speak to a shrink in Harley Street. Because that's what they're trained to do. They're not judgmental, and I'm sure they've seen worse versions of you walk through the door. A lot of issues are semi-trivial in the cold light of day, but they can be the different. People have done some daft things. People have taken their life over things that, when people say, if they'd only said, but people don't say. You just find out about it afterwards, or the problem gets worse and worse and worse, and what could have been nipped in the bud but no one ever said anything, it becomes a huge problem, and then it's all over.
And I'm picking up a parallel, I guess, in terms of the working world or the outside of the sport world, is that actually you found a real value in speaking to somebody that wasn't in your world, that had your agenda at heart, and actually you spoke to them, or you would recommend people to speak about things which might have felt small but could actually be very big in your world.
What is a small issue, what is a major issue in one person's life can be as simple as a telephone call to put this right for someone else. And I think that's the difference between feeling lost and having the confidence to pick up a phone, because sometimes the hardest thing of the lot is to pick up the phone. It's a bit like, the hardest thing of the lot is to walk across the bar and say to a girl, can I buy you a drink? Because otherwise people end up looking at each other all night and then going home separately, or whatever, when in fact you find that sometimes you have a huge amount in common with that person. And that person could change your life. They could absolutely destroy it as well. So it then comes down to your ability to work out what the crack is. But if it's a mental health issue and the support systems are in place, I mean, there's telephone lines people can ring. It's obviously been looked at very seriously. A fairly substantial amount of money has been allocated for mental health, and for obvious reasons, because you can't have people taking their lives over what certain people would class as trivial. But it's not trivial for those that are going through it, and everyone has breaking points. And everyone has constant reminders. I think the key is identifying the trigger points that cause these problems to raise their heads. And once what makes these things kick in, and they're not easy to explain. Though that would be something that would be drawn out of people over time, depending on the seriousness of what was sat in front of these experts.
It's music to my ears, really, hearing you talking that way, because I guess a lot of the work that I do is around talking to people to try and understand it, and it's never easy to get there quickly to find out exactly what those trigger points are. You know, sometimes they take some uncovering. A story that I often share would be, we've often taken 30, 40, 50 years to learn strategies to manage our lives, so unlearning them or unpicking them might take some time. So hearing you talk about that, looking for that root cause or looking for the underpinning issues is really key.
Honesty doesn't come easy. Well, put it this way, I think that if you have someone with an issue sat in front of someone who's a complete stranger but is respected because they work in Harley Street and they're obviously good at what they do, it's easier for someone to say what their issues are. How to get to the direct root to the problem, and then how to rectify it so that those trigger points, because I think that if you talk to a psychologist, what you're actually taught is how to deal with things that will happen for the rest of your life. That would be my interpretation of it. Your memories of whatever this event was, or these events were, or these people, or whatever, there are constant reminders all around you. So it would be unreasonable to think that just a few conversations or many conversations with a psychologist is going to almost like wipe the tape, so you never think about it ever again. So it's what are the trigger points and how that person could react to it to get to almost like to sort of wipe their brow. That's gone again, and away you go. Because all that would actually happen, if you can't get to that point, then you just cannot focus, you can't concentrate, and in many people's eyes, you're unworkable.
And I strongly believe you can't get rid of it, but it's getting to know it and understand it and appreciate it.
That's a good way of saying it.
Would be a way of taking it forward. And I love your sort of story in terms of actually then how do we work with this going forward for the rest of our lives, because we are where we are, and how do we go forward? Which leads me on to ask about kind of, in terms of mental health, probably more about mental well-being. So how would you suggest or advise, or what tips do you have for having a good mental health, your well-being? How would you look after yourself, or what advice would you give to others?
I would say take regular breaks.
Right. Yeah.
If I was feeling a bit either under pressure, or if I would just go walk the beaches of Northumberland.
Okay. Yeah.
Jump in a car and go. Yeah. And those that either love me or rely on me. Yeah. Will just have to accept the fact that Dad's gone for a couple of days. Whatever. I think that we live in a society where, well, we live in Great Britain. It's got some of the most fantastic terrain in the world. Yeah. Most beautiful beaches. We've got everything here, and yet people just live in cars, offices, go home, go to pubs, go to restaurants, and they're the ones who are lucky, who've got jobs, who've got mortgages, houses, and can afford to go to pubs. There's a whole bunch of other people who can't afford any of that. So why we should consistently hang around the same parish or the same city or whatever. I know we got commitments, I know we got kids, I got 4 kids. However, the best way to look after others is to look after yourself, I believe. But that's something that you actually have to learn. How people do it. I would say take regular breaks, because life's stressful enough as it is, and if there are contributing factors that would make you be challenged in day-to-day life, then a complete change of scenery will do you as probably more good than a conversation. And many professional people would say, go walk the beach.
I really like the idea of the fresh air and getting out and seeing the beautiful terrain that we have around here, and I hear that it's one of the strong kind of strategies you use to looking after yourself. And just to wrap us up today, I'd like us all to go away actually from the discussions we've had, thinking about our well-being, and actually how do we look after ourselves? Who do we speak to? What is our support network? Because the well-being seems to be actually really key, because everything we've talked about over the series of conversations we've had has had a very technical or a tactical aspect in terms of cricket, but more crucially I think there's had a lot about the psychology and the mind and how that's played out in terms of living and performing as a parent, as a friend, as a cricketer, or as a member of the public, really. So I'm just wanting to not lose sight of the power of psychology and our personal well-being.
What we have between our ears, our brain, is an incredible beast, which you can. There are people who it's not about money. There are people who've got fortunes who have got real mental health problems. There are people who've got nothing who live very peaceful lives. How you could actually find a balance in everyone's life. Some people have got to want to help themselves, and sometimes helping themselves is asking for help. That's first base. From there, you then have to go and sit in front of someone who's a total stranger. Sometimes it's easier to write down what the issues are because someone can't talk about it. Whatever it takes, people express themselves in different way. I've got a pal who's a brilliant painter who paints in his most saddest times of life. That's his therapy. Because his only other option is what I wouldn't want to have the phone call about, and that is he's done it. So how people keep busy, how people keep active, how people keep on a level playing field in all these challenging environments and circumstances that get thrown at us in life. We should talk more. We should talk more. We really should talk more. And the more doors that are open, the better. We can't moan about mental health if we're closing down so many places of advice because of funding costs. We can't. Not everyone can go and sit outside the doctor's surgery because the doctor has only so many hours in the day as the rest of us, and in between time he's trying to treat people with physical illness, where people, you can actually thing with mental health, as we obviously know, is you can look at someone and they look fine. If you're a doctor and someone comes in with poor skin, you could treat them for acne. Or if they come in with something else, you can treat them for something. With mental health, I think it's a very, very fine line. I would rather say go for long walks, try and get as much peace and quiet as possible, and stay away from prescription drugs, because a lot of the prescription drugs make the problem worse. Don't drink alcohol because alcohol will make it worse. Don't do this, don't do that, because that will make it worse. Sometimes you have to meet people halfway. It's whatever works. And we live in it. I try and imagine what it must have been like at the end of the First World War and the end of the Second World War, because you get people who obviously get, soldiers who get post-traumatic stress. and it can raise its head 15 years later after an event has taken place. And the thing is, if it raises its head, all it's actually taught is to get that person to a situation where they're more stable and know how to deal with the triggers that are going to come, that people know are going to come. And if you talk about the homeless situation, I mean, we did a lot of work in America with homeless people, a lot of Vietnam veterans. It was explained to me, both there and in this country, that the companionship of those that live on the streets is not dissimilar to a military.
Right.
You know, people are street soldiers. And people, you know, sort of like get their head down in whatever environment they find themselves, and that's homelessness for you. It just happens to be there are similarities within the military, and I know people I've worked with people who were in the military who suffer with post-traumatic stress. And if you sign up to serve your country, whoever you sign up for has got to look after you, knowing, in the safe knowledge that for what you're going to get put through, there can't just be a case of you are no longer in the army 15 years later and then see you later, because there's bound to be situations that are going to arise. And the suicide rate is too high. One is too many. So sport, you know, good luck to it. It's doing everything it can. It's trying to learn from its past, and I'm sure it's trying to find a better method. But if you talk about my players' union, the Professional Cricket Association, that is a massive, massive forward movement. And there's obviously someone like Jason Ratcliffe was very inspirational. Rattus was key to that. He fought for that, and people now see the worth of it. And there's many people who've gone through it and will be going through it right as we speak now.
And I think I would add to that, in the wider work that I do in other sports, that the mental well-being or the mental health agenda is much higher, which is fantastic news. There's some really good work going on, but I think it's an area which, whether it was there before and it's only come to light more so now, I don't know, but it is absolutely crucial, because, as you say, one suicide's too many. And you know, I think sharing the stories that you've shared today, I think is just another little contributor towards other people understanding a little bit about themselves, feeling brave about going to have those conversations, which I think is the key message. And the last message for me, which I would like to give to the people who have listened to your story and the conversations we've had, is if nothing else, talk more.
You need to talk. I believe that there's a better future if we communicate. And if I think about my own life, the better the communication in the sporting environment that I was, the better the results. You know, whether you win trophies or not, there was a very obvious improvement in performance, and there was a very big improvement in us as people. And that was visual, that is sport. But I mean, you know, the ability to pick up a phone and speak to people, or the ability to sit in front of people, or the ability to put your hand up and say, you know what, I'm struggling here. I think people are more perceptive, they're more receptive to how can I help? Even in this day and age where budgets are cut, as I say, you will find that there are people who are there to help. And as I say, as Wes sat here talking now, there will be a professional cricketer or a professional rugby player or a professionalist, and we're just talking sport, who will be going through the mire, and the time won't be right for them to say, can you help me please?
Well, what we will do after the show is put on the notes from today's discussion some access to some organisations that would be able to, you know, be engaged to talk around some of these key issues, which I think is a really important point. There are many, and we will list one or two of them. But I do again want to just parallel your comment there about, actually, it's not just the talking aspect. It's been really powerful for me in terms of helping you perform at your best. It helped you perform at your best in cricket, but actually I'd like to parallel it to everyone in terms of, actually, by talking more, having more meaningful, purposeful conversations, we can perform best in our lives.
100%. You completely transform your life. completely transform the lives of those that you care for and those around you. It's when people don't communicate that the real issues arise, I believe. And when things drift, when people say, I never saw it coming, it's all over, it's too late. There's no harm in saying, are you all right?
Just reach out.
There you go.
Well, on that note, once again, Paul, thank you ever so much for being so open, honest, sharing your stories, allowing us to have a really purposeful, meaningful conversation. And I sincerely hope that we do make a difference to some of the people that are listening into what we've pulled together today. So once again, thank you ever so much.
No problem.
So there we have it, yet another honest, heartfelt and insightful conversation with Paul around the broad subject of mental health. It is such an important subject in both ensuring the well-being of individuals as well as helping them perform to a high level. I particularly liked the link Paul made when he said teams and organisations that talk more and communicate better will often achieve good results. I also take from this that the engaging in supporting and promoting positive mental well-being does have a positive effect on results in whatever environment you are working within. As always, the conversation has raised many areas of reflection and question for me, and I would like to pose the following to you. Who do you talk to when you're not feeling great? And also, what are the signals you notice in those around you when they require somebody to talk to as their mental well-being is not good? I do hope you find the questions useful to consider. I would love to hear any of your reflections on how you manage your mental health. Please leave a review or comment on any of the usual social media platforms. This helps engage new listeners and also really helps them see the value of the podcast. On the theme of helping listeners, we also have some new resources being available in the next month or so. Keep a lookout on our Sports Stories website, which is at www.sportstories247.com, and also keep an eye out on the social media platforms. So to finish off with you today, I'd like to thank you for joining me and also encourage you to keep talking and listening, as this is shown to be a great for both your mental well-being as well as others. Enjoy your week, and I look forward to you being with me on the Sports Stories podcast for another brilliant guest next week.